Well, one is done in the Ontario Hockey League. No first round series goes the distance. We're getting set for round number 2. And my good friend Dan Mahar, I hope you enjoy the hoodie I decided to wear today. If you're not watching on our YouTube channel, you're missing out. But I know my good buddy, who's a fan of a team I absolutely cannot stand in the National Hockey League, is excited to put that mug down. And let's focus on your ugly mug for a second longer here. I thought I'd put on my Leafs hoodie to subtly troll you as you hope that we can finish recording this in time for you to catch the opening faceoff of your dumb hockey team.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate your dumb hoodie. And as much as we hate each other's teams, they've been doing each other favors lately. I mean, Montreal took out Florida a bunch of times for you, going to hand you first place in the East, and your Leafs managed to beat Columbus for Montreal. So we'll try and do you one more favor and eliminate that Ovechkin kid in the first round of the playoffs because it's starting to look like that's what's going to happen. So.
I'm glad you acknowledged at least that my Leafs, that's right, sitting in first place in the Eastern Conference as you cling to hopes of a wild card spot. How the tables have turned since we were in high school, Dan Mahar.
Well, be careful. Not in the Eastern Conference, just that division, Mike. You got Washington first in the Eastern Conference. You
True.
got, but yes, the tables have turned. But I think I can say this on solid ground now. I know it sounds like every team says, but these Habs are going to be good for a long time. Mark my words.
Yeah, okay. I'll mark them. And you know what? You might want to be marking some other things because Dan mentioned a name that I just wanted to touch on as we begin this week's episode of the OHL podcast. I may be trying to subtly troll Dan because he's a Habs fan and I'm a Leafs fan, so I'm wearing my Leafs hoodie. I also may have been less subtly trolling fans of either the Washington Capitals or Alex Ovechkin on X the last couple of days. I'm a junior hockey guy through and through, but my hockey universe revolves around Wayne Gretzky. Put your politics aside right now. I'm not interested in that. But as a kid growing up in the 1980s, Wayne Gretzky was everything. And I will just be honest, I find it a little bit difficult that any one of the records that he set is about to be, or now has been in this case, broken. It just doesn't make sense in my hockey universe. So I want to keep my hockey universe the way that it's always been. Thank you very much. You go right ahead and cheer Alex Ovechkin, and I will not so subtly remind you that he's still more than 1,200 points behind Wayne Gretzky in the overall point totals. But anyway, that's just me.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have terribly vested emotion in this either way, other than to say the most fascinating thing for me in this whole thing is they have now played the exact same number of games, Wayne Gretzky and Alex Ovechkin, for Ovechkin to go up by 1 goal. And to me, that is incredible to have it land on the exact same game mark. That's kind of unbelievable to me, but fascinating for both players, really.
It took Ovechkin longer, though, because Gretzky didn't score for the last, 8 or 9 goals of his career. So he actually reached the goal milestone sooner. But you're right. The parallels are incredible. And I don't think we can argue that it's actually become far more difficult to score goals in the National Hockey League in the last 20 years than it was 40 years ago. There were some goals that you look back at highlights of Wayne Gretzky scoring goals, and goaltenders weren't even doing the butterfly. Like they stick out a leg as if that's somehow with this itty bitty pad on it. Like that's going to stop a shot, right?
Yeah, you know what? There's probably 8 or 9 viable arguments each way on why each other was the best. I mean, Wayne Gretzky was dishing that puck a whole lot more than Ovechkin. He was getting all the dishes, so you could argue that. Yeah, goalies are much tougher to beat now, so that's a check in Ovechkin's favor. I'm happy to just say both accomplished a heck of a lot in their career, and it just gives you a good talking point for this year to have someone finally beat that.
Well, it brought up for me the talking point of this, Dan. Ernie Godden, former Windsor Spitfire, back in 80, 81, 87 goals in one OHL season. Never to be broken, right? Never say never, but it's never to be broken, right?
I like the never say never advice. I'm gonna go out on a limb because I probably won't have to back this up for God knows how long, but I say it will get broken.
Come on.
You know what? You saw
87 in a season? Yeah, okay.
87 a season is I know it sounds crazy, but I mean you had Lardis flirting with the 70s this year. You had We've seen Tavares. We've seen these guys get into the 70s. So I'm not gonna say that someone can't, pop 10 more. I think at some point it's bound to happen.
Never say never. You're right, because as a kid, I never would have ever believed that any of Wayne Gretzky's records. He rewrote the book when I was a kid, the record book that is, and I never would have believed we'd be sitting here in my lifetime having this conversation. Funny you mentioned Nick Lardis and his 71 goals this season, because even with those 71, Dan, which is the closest anybody has gotten to Ernie Godden's 87 in a season in almost 20 years. But even with Lardis's 71 this season, he's got 155 goals in his OHL career. John Tavares scored 215 OHL goals in 247 games. Never will it ever be broken, Dan Mahar. Am I right this time?
Well, let's just say the circumstances have to align for you to get anywhere near that because you have to be so good and get so much ice time as a 16-year-old that you can start putting numbers on the board, 25, 30 goals in your rookie year, yet not be good enough to make the NHL at 18. So you have enough runway to get. So there's a lot of circumstances have to unfold for you to kind of beat a record like that. But again, I think all these things are made to be broken and you can see a pathway to any of them being broken. So it's unusual, but I could see it happening.
Well said. So Ovechkin overtakes Wayne Gretzky's NHL regular season goals record. John Tavares has the OHL record for career goals at 215. Ernie Godden has the record for most goals in a single OHL season at 87. I love doing this podcast, but I hope we are not any longer doing this podcast when that happens, as Dan says it will, because I just like my universe this way. I like it orderly. The London Knights win all the time, and Ernie Godden's single season mark never gets broken. That's how this OHL should work, right?
Oh, I'm with you. It's not just the OHL, Mike. I had this debate with a friend the other day, and I said I think humanity peaked in the '80s, but that's just my opinion. So,
As sure as we are about Ernie Godden, John Tavares, and humanity peaking in the 1980s, we are also sure that nary a week, dare I say a month, can go by without the Niagara Ice Dogs landing themselves on the front pages for anything other than what they're doing on the ice. Dan, the latest mess, I am so fired up about this. I'm going to do my best to temper my commentary here. But I'll tell you what, my final point, spoiler alert, the Ontario Hockey League has to force a sale of the Niagara Ice Dogs. That's the beginning and the end of it. But what do you make, Mr. Mahar, of this latest mess at the Meridian Center?
it all sort of starts to align to explain why there's a cultural review going on. And I had a lot of people ask me this week. What's going on in Niagara? Does the owner have to go? Does this that? And I said, well, you know what? To have a cultural review could mean a few things. And this latest incident, by all accounts, was the entire team basically trashing a movie theater, acting like clowns in public. Uh, in theory, nothing to do with the owner, nothing to do with the coaches. Players took this upon themselves. And you have to say, when you've got 18, 19-year-old players, they should know better. So, what are the conditions in that city, in that organization, that are causing everyone to lose their mind and just do stupid things like this? So I think the league stepping in saying, hey, what gives? Is it lack of leadership? Is it messaging from above? Is it just something about this city and the way the organization's run that tells them they have carte blanche? So I don't know, Mike. It's tough to figure out exactly what the root of all this is. But I mean, this latest action is kind of inexcusable, is it not?
Do you think that there's any possibility, Dan, because we are dealing with teenagers after all, 18, 19, maybe 20 years old? And believe you me, I am all for accountability. I really am. And we'll get into that more in a moment. But do you think it's possible that players at this age might be rebelling against an owner or a way of doing business with the Niagara Ice Dogs that makes them say, screw it. You don't care about us. We don't care about you.
It's an interesting theory, and I'm not going to discount that entirely. It's possible. I still don't understand how that connects to being idiots in public and destroying other people's property and ruining other people's time. That's a decision you make personally that reflects only upon you. Yeah, I mean, you might be trying to send a message to the owner. Maybe that's true. But for my money, when you're in public as a junior hockey player, people are going to know who you are. You've got a reputation to uphold. There's a standard to uphold, and this all reflects upon you, whether you like it or not. So when you choose to behave like that, if that's what you do to send a message to the owner, I think you're kind of misguided there too. So I'm just saying that it looks to me like it's more than just the owner that's rotten in Niagara right now.
Here's what I've learned in the last week or so since this story came out. And some of it is incredibly wild stuff about the way this owner goes about trying to save a buck or two along the way. I can't substantiate any of it, but there's a lot of smoke around this, so it's difficult for me to believe that at least some of it isn't true, but I'll just leave it there. That ties in though to my point of, if this is the way you're being treated, kind of feeling like you're being nickeled and dimed by an owner, might you respond in a rebellious way in public? I'm not excusing it. I'm just wondering if that's part of the recipe here. But to take this a step further, the incident in question to which you allude, Dan, the movie theater incident, let's call it, is actually the incident that precipitated the third party review by the Ontario Hockey League. And what I've been told is, as this information came out, the league said to the Niagara IceDogs, as punishment, because you did not hold your players accountable for their behavior in that public place, you are now going to have to suffer the consequences on the ice. Thus, the penalty was each and every one of your players sits for a period through the first two games of your playoff series with the Barrie Colts. Of course, the Ice Dogs, being the Ice Dogs, they decide the league can't possibly mean this, right? So we're not going to sit our players in game number one, or certainly not anybody of the top six forwards, the top D pairing, whatever, the starting goaltender. We're not. The league can't be serious. Well, let me tell you something. The league was serious, and all of a sudden, the Ice Dogs were in that predicament in game number two when they basically had to go through the entire roster and find ways to sit these guys for one period in one game. It's absolutely ludicrous stuff. When I first heard it reported out of Niagara, I thought, because this came out on March the 31st, and I just thought, well, nice try. You're 6 hours early for April Fool's here. I'm not going to fall for the prank. And lo and behold, it was not a prank. So here, bear with me here. But I'm going to say again, I do believe in accountability. There are 100 other ways, in my opinion, to hold people accountable here. Can you take away player privileges in the locker room? I know it's frowned upon. I'm not even sure we're allowed to bag skate players anymore, but can we do something? Can we add another work? I don't know what else we can do, but what the league actually supported here in having players sit in a playoff game completely, completely damages the integrity of the game. Imagine if you're a fan of the Niagara Ice Dogs and you take the 90-minute or so trip from St. Catharines up to Barrie to watch a playoff game, and that's the team you get to see. Your starting goaltender is on the bench when some kid that's never played an OHL playoff game is starting in goal for you in a critical playoff game. You want to split on the road, and that's the team you get to see. If you're a fan of the Barrie Colts, yes, the Barrie Colts were going to likely win the series anyway, but what kind of integrity of the game is represented in a punishment like that? Fine the team, take away another draft pick. I don't care what you do, but in that case, I think the Ontario Hockey League has forgotten its responsibility to fans. I find this preposterous on the surface. I didn't believe it was actually true, but everything I've heard since it was first reported on March the 31st has backed up. This was exactly the punishment that the league agreed to, because originally the team did not hold the players accountable for the movie theater incident. But I think this is a massive mistake on the part of the league because it damages the integrity of the game and they forget their responsibility to the fans. You want fans to pay money to come and see your game? You better make sure they're seeing a fair game, period. So you got to figure out another way around this. And then just to close the loop on it, with Niagara being the mess that they are on the ice, off the ice, the cultural problems, there have been staff members of the team that have quit. We saw this year one of the winningest coaches in Ontario Hockey League history get ousted from his job in Erie for problems that sounded similar, right? There was a cultural problem. There was something within the human resources department that Stan Butler ran afoul of. You name it. What precipitated a staff member quitting? What kind of culture exists in the front office? What in what way is this owner managing his hockey team, trying to save money, whatever it may be? If you want to recruit, if you want players to go there, if you want people to pay to see the Niagara Ice Dogs in any game, home or away, you got to come in here. You got to fix this. Get a fixer. I don't care. Think back to the Flint Firebirds when Rolf Nilsson was in his early days. He wanted to make sure his kid got ice time. The team walks into the office and says, "We're quitting." Like everybody just lost their minds there. Who comes in? Barclay Branch at one point, Joe Birch at another point, George Burnett at another point. Get a fixer. If you offer George Burnett the big check, maybe he'll come from Guelph and save your franchise in Niagara. I don't know what the answer is, but Darren DeDobler is not the answer. You got to force a sale here. The integrity of the league is at stake. End of rant.
It's a good rant, Mike. So I really won't add a whole lot there, other than to say I love your point about the accountability to the fans, and I would say that stretches beyond just the league and how the league cracked down on this. I'd say that accountability to the fans has to be felt by the owner, the coaches, the GM, and the players. When you're going undertaking any of these actions, you got to think about those people who are plopping down their money game after game to support you and watch you. And like you talked about, Mike, the integrity of the league relies upon it. Could you imagine if Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner decided they were going to get rowdy at a movie theater, and you had found out after paying your money to see them play their first playoff game this year against the Ottawa Senators? The league said you got to sit those guys out because they threw some things around a movie theater. And I'm not saying absolve them of the accountability. First thing I'd say, those players got to be smarter and more accountable to their fans. But how about getting creative with the punishment? How about all those players go and clean up that movie theater every night for the next month? Or find out ways to actually hold them personally accountable for those decisions. Like you said, bring in that fixer, but maintain the integrity of the league and your playoff setup and everything first and foremost, because the number one accountability for a league is to the fans.
Now you're getting somewhere, Dan. I can't believe I didn't even think of that. Yes, send the whole team in as the cleanup crew when the movie theater closes. That is holding, because again, I'm all for accountability. I just think the way the league even supported this accountability of sitting players in playoff games, like I get it. You need to be held accountable. That's not the way to do it. And you got to ask yourself now, Dan, how many players do you think, especially now that the season has done, have asked out or will ask out or are asking out of Niagara?
Oh, it's just a repeating cycle, right? And you see it. They talk about the haves and have-nots in this league, but often the haves are teams that do things right, so players want to be there, and the have-nots, the teams that don't. And you're never going to break that cycle until you fix it. And you use that term fixer, Mike. So yeah, figure out how you're going to fix it, who that fixer is, but you got to fix it, or it's going to be a repeating cycle of not being able to compete based on basically stupidity.
Just to tie a nice bow on this, Darren DeDobler's 2-year suspension as general manager comes up for review in June. How do you think that's going to go?
Now he's going to say, I was suspended. I didn't know what happened there.
I'm innocent, man. I can't pin this on me. Oh, the coaches survey is out and it says, plus Kingston serves notice in the East. We've got lots more to talk about on this week's episode of the OHL podcast. Well, this NHL season has been as predictable as a puck rolling on its edge. No one knows where it's going, but that just means there's time for your favorite team to figure things out. And games left for you to get in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL. Try something super easy if you're a first timer, like betting on something like picking a team to win. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app, select your team, and place your first bet. And if you're new to DraftKings, listen up. New customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Dan, the OHL coaches poll comes out, and probably as a surprise to no one, London leads the way with 7 players mentioned in the poll. Brampton and Brantford each have 6 represented from the East. What do you make of what we heard from the coaches survey?
There was a lot of interesting things in there, Mike, and I'll start by saying I don't care about the shootout categories. Who's the best shootout shooter and goalie? Sure. The ones that always catch my interest are who the coaches flag as the most underrated, hardest working, and then the skill categories are obviously cool. So I think just off the top, Mike, a couple things that caught my eye. Love seeing Malik McGowan get recognized as second place for most underrated in the Eastern Conference. That's a kid I think adds so much to that team without a whole lot of acclaim. Could be in the hardest working as well. You look at the most improved category, Mike, which I think is also a really eye catching one for me. And you see a name like Charlie Paquette in there. And I think you just see the coaches just nailed it, in my opinion. These are the guys that have the best view of the league game after game. And when you go down those categories, you look and you see everything just completely makes sense to my eye test. And I think probably the funniest one for me, Mike, was best offensive defenseman. You look at arguably the top 3 were all in the West. When you've got Matthew Schaefer finishing third in that poll, you've got a pretty strong crop. So there's just it highlights the talent that's in this league. But I love those underrated and most improved categories, Mike, because they bring to the surface names you don't hear a lot about. But when you see them on the coaches poll, you say, those guys are extremely important to their teams, as you would note by seeing Luke Ellenis finish third in that poll for the West. That's a heck of an important player for the Kitchener Rangers, but again, not a marquee name. So a lot of interesting names made that list, Mike, but those were my takeaways.
Great point on the best offensive defenseman and the bounty of riches in the Western Conference. And you mentioned Charlie Paquette, Dan. How many times during this season, during our wraparound, did we talk about Charlie Paquette with the Guelph Storm? And dare I say, when Jet Luchenko gets traded next season at some point, that C would look awfully good on Charlie Paquette's jersey in Guelph.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But with all the negativity around Guelph this year, and what's going on, they're better than this. The one constant in my mind watching that Storm team play was just what Charlie Paquette brought to the table. Game in, game out, he tried to lead that team as best he could and did a bang up job. So nice to see him recognized in this poll, Mike. And I think you're absolutely right. If he's back in a Storm jersey next year, I would expect to see a C on it.
I had my eyes, of course, on some of the sexier categories, if you will, and it's impossible to argue, in my opinion, the guys that are in the top spot, both East and West, with both best and hardest shot. Nick Lardis with Brantford and Casper Haltonen with the London Knights. And I just think, especially when it comes to hardest, I know it's also incredibly accurate, but when Haltonen sets up for that one timer on the power play, my goodness gracious, is it something to behold?
Is it ever? And I like to couple that category with the one that's further down the list, which is best shot blocker. Remember, those shot blockers are putting themselves in front of those shots from guys like Lardist and Haltonen. And you and I, Mike, just came out of a series we watched with Flint and Kitchener, and it was nice to see Blake Smith, number one in the shot blocking, and Carson Campbell get a mention there too, because we just saw what those gentlemen do to get in lanes, regardless of who's firing that puck. And when you've got Haltonen and Lardis firing at you, it takes some guts to stand in front of that. So nice to see the acknowledgement for those players as well.
I've had this conversation with my broadcast partner on Kitchener Rangers games, Paul Fixter, who, of course, used to coach in this league. And I find the whole shot blocking thing fascinating. I love it as much as I think you do, as much as many fans do. You love to see that person that's willing to get in front of that Lardis or Halton and Baum or whoever it is taking the shot. But we all know, right? We recognize that there's a guy on the ice who's full of equipment, whose job it literally is to block the shots. Like it blows my mind. And Fixie, because he also was with the Colorado Avalanche during their Stanley Cup years. He got 2 rings with the Avalanche, and Patrick Waugh was the goaltender when Paul was there with that Stanley Cup team. And Patrick Waugh, Fixie tells me, was famous for saying, look, if you want to block a shot, fine. But you sure as hell better block it, because if you deflect it, I'm going to be really upset. So again, I admire it. We all applaud it, I think. And yet I find myself utterly fascinated by the risk these players are taking of possibly serious injury when there's a guy on the ice that's got all the equipment on that is supposed to stop the puck in the first place.
Yeah, and it's funny, Mike, because that category, I always have mixed emotions about that category because I do believe there's a real art to getting in lanes, and you see the teams that do it really well, the teams that never give a team a lane, it seems hard to get a shot through. However, I did hear an NHL color commentator, and I can't remember who it was last week, but I had to chuckle because I fully agreed. He said he hates the top shot blocking category as something to praise guys about because it should be named the category of players that never have the puck. And there's some truth.
There's some truth. The other one I wanted to just highlight is best body checker. In the Eastern Conference, it was Kayshawn Aitchison. In the West, it was Connor Clattenburg. But I'm focused on Aitchison because I'm sure you, like me, Dan, I'm pretty sure it was game 2, Barrie and Niagara. And Aitchison absolutely blew up Sean Doherty with a hit that, for my money, and it wasn't penalized on the play, as I recall, Aitchison knew right away as soon as he delivered it. Like, you could see him, his hands were getting ready to take the fight that was surely coming, but Doherty had his head down, skating east-west through the neutral zone, and Kayshawn Aitchison blew him up. It was an incredible, and in my mind, textbook body check.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned him in particular because when I look at that body checking category too, I think Keyshawn Aitchison is absolutely the best at those open ice hits, that which is an art. It's really hard to do, especially because players are afraid to do them because they don't know how they're going to be called, even if it's a clean one. But he knows how to find a guy in open ice, just time it up perfectly and square the guy up perfectly, which is a lost art. And you mentioned Connor Clattenburg, who it was nice to see his name mentioned so many times in the coaches poll as well for best defensive forward, hardest checker, etc. He likes to get in hard in the forecheck and he likes to put you into the board. So there's kind of two different styles of body checkers there leading the respective conferences in the coaches poll. But it's a fading art, Mike. So you got to give these guys credit that do it consistently and do it well.
Shout out to the fan who came to a Firebirds Rangers game in Kitchener wearing a Connor Clattenburg Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds jersey. Nicely done. We enjoy seeing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on that theme, I will give a shout out to the various Flint Firebirds fans who made the trek all the way to Kitchener wearing their gear. Love seeing that in the playoffs. It's great that fans make that journey.
We started this episode by talking about one being done. That's round 1 of these OHL playoffs. No series goes the distance. In the West, Dan, we both misfired on the Erie Saginaw series, although you had it going further than I did. I thought the Erie Otters were in too much a state of disarray to really make a lot of noise against the defending champs. You had it going further, but we both missed it, thinking Saginaw would win. And boy, oh boy, not only did they lose, but 5 games Erie knocks off the defending champs, and the 4 wins for Erie, they score 6, 7, 8, and 9 goals. Yowza.
Yeah, well, I'll start off by saying, as I mentioned to you before the playoffs even started, that's the one I labored the most on. I really had trouble picking that series. I said Saginaw in 7, and I went back and forth so many times, and I felt that the health status of Matt Schaefer and Carey Terrance were factors. Didn't love necessarily Erie's defense, even though Saginaw, you could say the exact same thing. Where I kind of misfired is I kind of underplayed the health situation on the Saginaw side, not realizing Andrew Oak would not make an appearance in the series. We all saw Michael Misa miss the last couple games. We didn't see that coming, but don't discount guys like Jacob Kluche, how important he is in that team. So there was just a little bit, they're a little too thin on the goal preventing side. And we talked about poor Papineau Net, just had a rough series. But in hindsight, every game they played in that series, Mike, I kept reminding myself of why I picked Erie to finish top 3 in the West this year. They have a lot of talent in that roster. And if they were able to turn it on, which we saw, I mean, look at the series Martin Misiak had. We talked about Panofimis last year. They've got firepower. Sam Alfano showed up in the coaches poll as well. Just huge firepower up front for Erie. And if they get clicking, which we saw, this one, I got to admit, did not surprise me, to be honest.
It did surprise me based on the way the regular season went and Saginaw's addition of Chernishoff and how dominant they could be on the top end of their offense. But you're right. The big Achilles heel there not only with guys that were banged and battered, but Andrew Oak not being there for the Saginaw Spirit. But your description of Erie in the West and why you picked them so high makes me think of the series that I missed on in the East. So we both went 3 out of 4 in the West, missing the Erie Saginaw series. I took the underdog, if you will, in the 4-5 in the East and thought Brampton would get it done. And you might argue it would probably be a pretty weak argument, but you might argue that they put a scare into Oshawa with the series going 6 games, but it's not like it went to game 7 overtime. And I just look at that Brampton team, and much like you just described Erie kind of getting it together, which I wasn't sure after the regular season, for whatever reason, Dan, it just didn't come together for the Brampton Steelheads. And oh boy, for the next few years now, it's going to be pretty bleak in the GTA.
Which I'm sure everyone's just cringing to hear because you had a team that was loaded for bear by all accounts, including our own. Should have been right at the top of that conference, powerhouse, cruising to the third round probably. And you had trouble getting crowds for that. They had trouble getting on track all year. Now what happens when they pay the piper for all the graduations they're going to have? And yeah, that's serious, Mike. I mean, you said it. I mean, I called Oshawa, you called Brampton. I think we both had 7 games. We knew it was going to be a tight game, could go either way. I just felt I was sticking to my guns from the season prediction. I feel Oshawa is still the best team in the East, all things considered. The the most loaded for the playoffs team, and I'm starting to buy and trade on Kingston as the second best team in the East. I think that's where we're at. Brampton just never quite pieced it together. And this final game that we saw, Game 6, that Oshawa took 4-1, both teams missing some big names. You had Beckett Senek out on Oshawa's side. You had McDonnell and Soa, Ivan Kovic out on the Brampton side. So both teams missing some players, but that's where you go to that depth. That's who's next up, who's the wave. So you see Colby Barlow score early in that game. You see you got Andrew Gibson and Ben Danford, best defensive defenseman in the East, according to the coaches. They've just got too much, in my opinion, Mike. And over the course of 7 games, they're going to figure out a way. But yeah, your point about the GTA, I worry about that next year because that team might not be so strong.
I love your point about Oshawa and the depth, and over 7 games, they're going to figure it out. Again, I was selling some of my stock in the Motor City because I didn't like the way the Gens finished. I wasn't sure what was going on. Like, I understood the addition of Pulio on the bench, but I'm like, is this like grasping at straws or an act of desperation because they're not sure about the guy they've had there all year? I don't know. I was obviously looking for a little more controversy than actually exists. It has been on paper, and I've been saying it all year. I think the best built team in the East, and probably the team best positioned to make it a series against London should it get to a rematch of last year's OHL final. I know I'm getting way ahead of myself, but full marks to Oshawa for pulling it together and getting it done in round one. You touched on Kingston, Dan, and I think you're onto something with that. I heard some folks even saying that the Wolves could jump up and bite the Fronts in this one because we know that Kingston historically, of course, playoff success has eluded them. But what a statement to sweep the Wolves out of the first round.
Yeah, when I look at Kingston, Mike, all year we had a lot of good things to say about him because they were just steady as she goes, kind of flying under the radar, weren't necessarily wowing anyone on paper, but when you really look at that roster, veteran, a lot of older players, playoff tested, experienced guys, structure. We talked about under Troy Mann. They play a disciplined style, always in position, not easy to score against. They shored up their goaltending. They added a bit of firepower. They're just kind of deep without wowing you, but they kind of, every time there was a statement game all year, Mike, they seem to come out ahead. Oh, they got a big battle against Barrie this weekend. Then they play Oshawa the next night. Then they play Brampton. They had all these statement games. They just one by one, even when they played the West, they'd play Windsor, they play Kitchener. They seem to find ways to win those games. And when you start making enough statements, someone's got to start listening. And I know I sure was. I'm saying that Kingston team is no joke. And we saw it in round one, Mike. And I think it's them and Oshawa for me.
We talked at the trade deadline with the moves that were made. And you might throw Sudbury into there because they certainly didn't sell. They had a guy like Muse, et cetera, for thinking that they at least had a shot. We knew a good team, Brampton perhaps, I think Sudbury, you could make the argument, would go out in the first round in the Eastern Conference. Well, now that's over, but look at this second round. My goodness, Brantford and Oshawa, Barrie and Kingston, we are in for a treat on that side of the second round of the playoffs.
Yeah, and I almost feel guilty saying what I just said because you look at how good Brantford is, right? How can you diminish what they're bringing to the table? And everybody knows how good Barry is too. So you've got really four heavyweights left on both sides. Everyone's going to look at the eight teams remaining and say, well, yeah, Erie's the most beatable team, right? Well, look what they just did in round one. I mean, how can you even argue they're not in that category anymore? So, and if anyone thinks London's just going to roll over those Erie Otters without much trouble, I suggest you think again. I think this Erie team's got something to prove, and they've already started proving it. I think this second round is going to be, I think, Mike, as good a second round as we've seen in the OHL in the last decade.
You touched on some of this, Dan, with the names that you mentioned in that Oshawa Brampton series: Ivan Kovic, Soa, McDonnell, Seneca. You look at the West, there was no Matthew Schaefer for the Erie Otters. Interesting to see if he comes back for the second round. Cameron Reed didn't finish the first round with the Kitchener Rangers. We often talk that the playoffs are some kind of war of attrition. Boy, oh boy, the attrition is starting pretty early when you look at the people that aren't in these lineups.
Yeah, and I know it's just a reality. This I kind of love it and hate it. I know it's how hockey goes. It's going to happen. It's a war. You're going to lose bodies. I always just want to see best on best. I want to see the best guys on both teams in the lineup. I don't want a team to win because they injured the other team's best player. So it happens. But we did see some healthy runs taken at those players, and it becomes a pretty obvious strategy. I mean, if you lay the body on the top guys enough times by games 5 and 6, it's starting to pay off. And in some cases, it pays off with that player not being able to go, which we saw. And Mike, you're around the players enough to know if these guys can't go in a playoff game, they really can't go. Like they're not doing well. So even if they do come back, it's probably something south of 100%. So that will be something to keep an eye on in the second round. How close are some of these guys to healthy, and how's that going to impact the series? Because one or two key absences could switch the gears in this whole series.
I love your point about the 8 teams remaining and the 4 series we're going to be treated to in the next couple of weeks in the Ontario Hockey League. This is going to be a tremendous second round. And don't worry about best on best, Dan, because Niagara's been eliminated. So you never know. Like when you go to the rink, there won't be anybody sitting because they threw popcorn in a movie theater. Okay.
Fair enough. Fair enough. That's comforting.
All right. The OHL podcast inbox calls BS, and our performers of the week are still to come on this week's episode of the OHL podcast. All regular season long, we like to finish each episode of this podcast with our prospect of the week. Now that we have shifted into playoff mode, that becomes a performer of the week. And Dan, I wanted to share with you an email we got from Chris, who writes to ohlpodcast@rogers.com. Hey, you guys, first of all, I like the podcast. Chris, we always appreciate, starting with flattery is always good, but you boneheads, okay, he didn't call us boneheads, but Chris said, your performers of the week, and you talked about a bunch of guys, and then you made your picks, but you forgot my hometown, Noah Morneau. How could you leave him out of last week's performers of the week? Duly noted, as I responded to Chris via email. And look, there were options. Let's be fair. Last week, we ended up going the direction we went for the reasons that we explained on last week's podcast. But I will tell you this, Chris, even in conversation over the past several days with coaches around a dinner table with the Kitchener Rangers, they were talking about Noah Morneau. So notice served. Dan and I just took another top performer from last week, but Morneau's 8 goals currently leads all playoff goal scorers, and his 11 points are tied for third. So again, duly noted, Chris.
Yeah. All right, Chris. I will say that Noah Morneau is the best penalty killer in the Western Conference. How's that for you?
I like that.
I
That
was
came right off the coach's ball.
right off the coach's poll. So, and
Wait, Chris, are you a coach?
so yeah, Chris, yeah, you've actually hit on something that is really tough, and Mike will attest to pick our performers of the week and even the rookies of the week. Every time I can speak for myself, Mike. There's probably 5 to 6 names minimum in the mix every time, and I know we're passing over guys that deserve it. And you talked about Noah Morneau. Well, what about Liam Greentree and Ilya Protas last week? Easily could have got the nod. So yeah, there are. It's not a slight to anyone who doesn't get named. A lot of worthy candidates.
Absolutely. And by the way, just to reinforce that point, I think it was the last weekend of the season, the regular season, that I did the dual prospect of the week with Porter Martone and Owen Griffin, and my buddy Mark, who edits this podcast and tries to make Dan and I look and sound better, called BS on me for that. He said, you can't have two. I said, whatever, it's my podcast. I'll do whatever the hell I want. So anyway, but Chris, you make a great point, and we wanted to acknowledge Noah Morneau, and we wanted you to know that other people are talking about him, including on the coaches poll and at dinner tables. And so there you go. So with that said, Mr. Mahar, who do you have as your performer of the week this week?
Well, Mike, I got no more no out of the win. No, I'm just kidding.
You had me for just a fraction of a second there.
That was for Chris. But honestly, I this week I have to give the nod to Charlie Schenkel in Kingston, Mike. You talk about a guy that came in at the trade deadline to help shore up something that was maybe a sore spot in Kingston. So what does he do in round one against a formidable opponent? Sweeps them 4-0, 1.83 GAA, 934 save percentage. I know, like, tit for tat with Jackson Parsons and Kitchener on numbers, but sweeping an opponent like Sudbury has to give him the nod. So I got Charlie Schenkel this week, Mike.
Excellent choice. And boy, doesn't that uh, lend a little bit of credibility to the deals that the Frontenacs made at the trade deadline, right? They figured, you know what, Schenkel's the kind of guy that we need to take us deeper this year, and what a performance he puts in round number one. I'm going a little bit off paper, I think, on this one, but I couldn't help but take notice of, even in a losing effort, even when you're in the final game of your season getting swept by the mighty London Knights, a kid by the name of Mason Ray scores his first career hat trick. He had 10 goals all regular season, and he puts up a hat trick in an elimination game that his team lost. So it struck me, of course, because you could easily just fold up your tent and go home, but Mason Ray decided not to do that. He maybe saved his best for last, you could argue. And I remember earlier in the season, Mason Ray is, of course, the son of head coach Scott Ray. How difficult might that be when you're coaching your kid? And at one point late in the season, Ray got elevated to a top six status on the roster. And Greg Cowan noted in the Owen Sound Sun Times that, look, this isn't just because you're the coach's kid, it's because you earned it there. And Cowan went on to detail how Ray had earned that. Hard to overlook for me when you're getting run out of your own building by the London Knights. You still put up a hat trick in what turns out to be your final game of the season. So my nod for the performer of this week goes to Mason Ray of the Owen Sound Attack.
And for that, Scott Ray is probably not going to chirp you about your height anymore. So that's
Did he do that? I forget already, that guy. Yeah. It was not meant to try to curry favor, so he's nicer to me. I just, the guy that jumped out at me, and I'm sure we'll have lots of big names and big point producers to talk about in the weeks ahead. But I thought, you know what? For a guy that had 10 all regular season to put up 1/3 of your season's output in your last game when you're being swept in your own building. And can we just give a nod there, Dan? How about the crowds that came out for the
oh,
final games of the Owen Sound Attack season, the smallest market in the league? Whatever's going on there right now, that city loves that team.
well, and not just that city. They have the biggest drawing area in the OHL, I believe. People drive from an hour away for those games, and they love their Bears there. I mean, I was just your pick of Mason Ray. It's great that you gave a shout out to the Owen Sound Attacks. I know people are going to say, "Well, they got swept. They were inconsequential this year." No, they put up a fight in that series. Went out with a lot of pride. I watched a bunch of those games, and I got to tell you, they did nothing to embarrass themselves. Quite the opposite. I think they actually pushed London a lot harder than many expected, despite the series score. So I give a whole shout out to the Owen Sound players and crowd.
It's kind of a cool market. Now that you bring it up, I know a lot of people from where we live, Dan, in the region of Waterloo, Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, Elmira, New Hamburg, all those places that retire up to Grey County and along the shores of Lake Huron or into the Georgian Bay area. So you nailed it. So not only do folks come from an area where there's also a junior hockey history, but then they retire up there, continue going. They might drive almost an hour from the Southampton, Port Elgin area over. I've met friends when I'm in Owen Sound who come in from Collingwood, Meaford. It's a great point on the catchment area and how far these fans are willing to travel to go see the Attack play.
100%, Mike. And if you ever want to question just how appealing it is to play in Owen Sound, go check in how a California kid felt about playing there, and dig up Bobby Ryan's quotes about Owen Sound, and he'll tell you all you need to know about playing in that market. It's players love it, and there's a reason they love it. It's because the crowd loves them.
I thought you were talking about Lenny Greenberg, who also just came over and had been in California native, right? I'm like, there you go. So another reason for it. Anyway, we didn't mean to turn this into a recruiting tool or a tourism Gray County ad, but hey, here we are, and thought it was worth noting. And I guess on that note, boy, Dan, we're ready for round two. So we got London Erie in the West and Windsor Kitchener, and then we've got, as we talked about, Brantford and Oshawa. I can't believe that's the 1-4. And then Barrie Kingston in the East. We are set for some good times ahead.
Oh, which one do you watch is the only question. I mean, that's great hockey.
My attention will be somewhat taken up by the Windsor Kitchener series for obvious reasons, but looking forward to going there and getting me some Antonino's pizza when I'm in the border city of Windsor. That stuff is great. All right, that man over there is Dan Mahar. You'll find him on X at his name, Dan Mahar. I'm on X at Farwell_OHL. And don't forget to do what Chris did anytime you want. Send us an email, ohlpodcast@rogers.com. Subscribe on YouTube, follow on Instagram at the OHL Podcast, like, subscribe, tell a friend, because the games are only getting more meaningful from here. And Dan and I will be back in your ears in 1 week's time right here on the OHL Podcast.